right, here we go. I call the November 27th meeting of the Richfield City Planning Commission to order. Before we get started, I'll just note the ways you can participate remotely. If you wanted to call in with any comments during the meeting or the hearing during the meeting today, you would call 415-655-0001. That's 415-655-0001 with the access code 2631-822-6457 and the password of 1234. That being said, I would entertain a motion to approve the previous minutes.
Commissioner Hui motions to approve the minutes from last month.
Commissioner Stursa seconds.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, the previous minutes have been approved. Now is the time for open forum. The open forum is a chance for residents of the city to address the Planning Commission, generally on matters that are not scheduled to be before the Commission today. Do we have any remote comments or emails?
Chair, we do not.
All right. We'll wait a moment, just in case. Let's move on to the approval of the agenda. If someone should call in remotely, we can go back to that. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Commissioner Stursa moves the approval of agenda.
Surma seconds approval of the agenda.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda has been adopted. We have a public hearing to consider an ordinance amendment to allow micro units as an accessory use for religious institutions. Could we have the report from Planner Crosby, please?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. During their 2023 legislative session, the legislature passed a bill authorizing religious institutions to construct micro-unit dwellings on their property. Development of these micro-unit dwellings are being referred to as sacred communities, and they are intended to provide an additional means for faith communities to serve chronically homeless and extremely low-income individuals living in communities with volunteers. The new law sets some minimum standards for these developments. Micro-units are defined as no more than 400 square feet in size. The units are required to have a toilet, electricity, and smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. Between 1/3 and 40% of the units must be occupied by designated volunteers, and they must provide the city with a plan that outlines water and sewer management, parking, lighting, and access by emergency vehicles, and security and severe weather protocols. The law permits cities to designate these settlements as either conditional or permitted uses, but defaults to conditional uses if not otherwise stated. If allowed to default to a conditional use, the city would have no ability to impose any conditions, which would make the public hearing rather pointless. Therefore, staff is proposing an ordinance that would allow sacred communities as an accessory use to our religious institutions. This would avoid a very frustrating public hearing and would also make it so that the settlement would not continue if the religious institution were to cease. The current zoning code allows religious institutions as a conditional use in 3 zoning residential districts, the R, the MR2, and the MR3. Religious institutions are also allowed as permitted uses in the C2 general commercial zoning district. The ordinance before you this evening creates a definition for the term sacred community and adds language to each of these 4 districts to specify that these communities are allowed as an accessory use to approved religious institutions. I welcome any questions.
Commissioners?
I have a few questions. Would it be easier if directed at staff? Would it be easier to ask them all at once, or do you want to go one by one? No preference. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know how many sites in Richfield this would apply to?
Yes, Commissioner, Chair and Commissioner Sursa, there are currently 16 religious institutions throughout the city of Richfield. There are two, in addition to those 16, there are two that are the permitted use on a commercial property. I don't know if it's currently there anymore, but it appeared that the Hub used to have a church in it, and then there was one down in Kensington Park. But I don't think either of those would qualify because it has to be on the church property unless they got permission from the landlord, and that's pretty highly unlikely. So the straight-up answer is 16.
Thank you. And then how is it determined how many units are permitted on each site? Like, are there any setback requirements within the site or any width requirements between the homes or any sort of?
There isn't. I think that mostly the number of units each religious institution has maybe more guided by their resources and how much they can fund or how much they can staff. But generally, there is no distance separation between each unit, and only a 10-foot setback from the outside property line applies. They do have to provide a kind of that report to the city, that plan to the city in advance that talks about sewer and water capacity. So those elements might give us an idea of how many units and how they're going to be laid out. And we do have to have emergency vehicle access to these units. So there will be a little bit of forethought into the layout, but we don't generally have too much control.
So if the city, or if the city moves towards a permitted use approach, when would the city know that a community was underway, and when would it have those conversations about making sure that there's appropriate access for emergency vehicles?
They must provide us with that plan. So I would imagine that would be done in the beginning.
Prior to
Yes.
them being on site? Or could they be on site and then approach the city and say they're on site? There's no, it's not written.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. It doesn't specify, but we would certainly hope in good community that they would give us the heads up ahead of time before pulling permits.
And I know in other communities, people pay some money to live in the units. So does that mean that they would be required to go through a rental licensing that we require here in Richfield, or is this not considered rental?
No, no other permitting applies, so rental licenses would not apply either.
And is that because of the way the state law is written, or is that just the way the city attorney interpreted it, or our decision not to enforce that, or how
Yeah,
did that?
I believe that was the intent behind the law, and that part isn't specifically written either, but as it went through the legislative process, the intent was to make these as unregulated and as easy and financially viable for the religious institutions as possible. So that's why we're interpreting it that, or our understanding is that a rental license is not required.
And one last question, thank you
Yeah,
for
no problem.
answering all these. Has there been any interest expressed in the city at any of our religious institutions to have a sacred community?
I have not received any calls, no.
Those were my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Surma asking a question here. So I understand these, from what we've heard in the interpretation here in the packet, is that these would apply to properties directly adjoining sacred spaces of worship. My question is, do these also apply to properties not directly adjoining a house of worship, but that are also owned by a religious institution? Because I know of several here in Richfield, residential properties that are owned by religious institutions not directly adjoining their sanctuary. So does this apply to those types of properties as well?
My understanding is that it needs to be on the property of primary worship or directly, like, contiguous to. So if there was a parish house, like a house for for the head parishioner that was directly adjacent to the church, then they could also be on that parcel as well.
So
Does that answer your
so
question?
it has to be directly adjoining the house of worship.
Like
Okay.
the primary. So like if there's a pastor's house and the pastor's house is 3 blocks away from the church, that would not, like, they could not be over there.
Okay. Has to be directly adjoining the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Go for it.
Commissioner Hui, so the summary here says that, if we defaulted to conditional use, I guess I wasn't understanding exactly what the issue with like pointless and futile public hearings. Can you kind of talk what the intention?
Yeah, sure. So a public hearing is usually to review a request and then determine if there's any negative aspects of that request and to try to mitigate those negative aspects by imposing conditions of approval. So such as visibility with a fence or setback issues. And we don't have control over, we can't require a fence, or we can't require more parking, and we can't impose any conditions at all. So to hold a public hearing to impose conditions when we're not allowed to impose them, it would be a waste of time and money on the applicant's part. It would be making them go through a process for no good reason.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we don't want to do that to them or to ourselves.
If no one else, I have a couple of questions.
Chair.
Oh, sorry.
I've got one question. Did the legislature allow us to require like shower facilities, where someone to be able to clean up and maintain, some cleanliness?
So the legislature does require a toilet.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, but it doesn't specify what kind of toilet. It could be, it doesn't have to be a water toilet. It could be a composting toilet or some other type of toilet that's allowed by the various aspects of the building code. So each unit does not have to have running water. They could choose to have a shower and sink, like cleaning, like sanitation facility, or like hygiene building that is shared for the entire community. So each unit does not have to have running water.
Okay. Is there a requirement for at least the community to have running water?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, I
That
believe
would be a
so.
concern of mine, that's all. Make sure that there's, facilities to maintain hygiene for people. It's a human right.
Yes, I think that if they don't have like a separate facility for hygiene, then they would have to open up the church itself and let the community use the facilities in the church, in the primary church building, like the bathrooms and the showers in there. Yeah.
Go for it.
I didn't see anything about, sorry, it's Commissioner Hui. I didn't see anything about like, heat as a requirement. Is there any sort of requirement there?
It's not specified. It does require electricity, but how they're going to heat these is not dictated. So they do have pretty good building insulation requirements, but obviously in Minnesota, some sort of heat source would be prudent. And again, like with the toilet, it's up to them kind of how they get that done.
I had a couple questions. One, it says that that the permitted use would, or the conditional use would end if the religious institution closed. I have a concern, like, where I grew up, we recently had a few churches disband without a lot of warning. My concern would be, would there be some period of grace, or could we add that into our ordinance or code so that should a church close, the people living there would have some stability and it wouldn't be us closing down the community right away?
I'm not sure that that would need to be added into the ordinance per se. That is a good thought. Usually they have when they know they're going under, or they know that they're going to relocate, or whatever the situation is that causes this change, they usually know about it a few months in advance. And I would hope that they would be good stewards of their tenants and give them fair notice themselves. I don't know that that's on us to do that, but we can certainly make note of that internally as a policy, and certainly work with our church communities to not force anything that's unreasonable.
But if the community closed, would it require some action by the city council or staff to begin the process of closing the community, or would it just, they suddenly be out of compliance and then code action could be taken immediately?
Well, we always give notice. It wouldn't be necessarily something that the city council would need to do, but from a staff perspective, we would, reach out to them and let them know, and there'd be many iterations of communication before anything turned into something that might be of concern.
Thank you. And then my last question was, it said that Richfield, we do not regulate mobile homes, but those setback requirements, we could, if we did regulate mobile homes, we could impose those on these on these communities. Would staff, is that something that perhaps we should do? Is a 10-foot setback what you would recommend as a planner?
Yeah, we thought about that, and we do have in our residential districts something called cluster homes, and cluster homes allow a few single-family attached or detached homes on one property, and they're usually quite small. And so it's the closest comparable thing that we have to like a mobile home type regulation. And our setbacks for those for cluster homes are 5 and 10 feet. So it is very similar to probably what we'd end up recommending if we were to write it into the code. So that's why we're not recommending we make any changes at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, then I will open the public hearing. If there's anyone here who wants to address, please come over to the podium. Otherwise, did we receive any comments?
We did not receive any phone calls or any emails, and there are no participants on the line still.
Okay. I would entertain a motion then to close the public hearing.
Commissioner Hui, I motion we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Surma seconds that.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, now we can move on to the we need a motion to approve the staff recommendation. If there's no
We
further
have a
discussion.
conversation.
Yeah, of course.
I applaud the creativity of the solution, or of this one piece of the puzzle. We obviously need to, I think we obviously need to be doing more to house people. And where I struggle with this just in the slightest is that you also, like, there, I guess the points that I struggle on are not actually relevant to the, what we have before us. I do think that it does not do anyone any service to have a conditional use on this. We've had public hearings in the past that were, I can remember a liquor license where the community really did not want us to approve the liquor license, but our hands were kind of tied, and it was just a really unfortunate conversation and situation, and I have no desire to put us, another board, in a situation of having to hold a public hearing when your hands are tied and you can't really require anything or respond to any of the concerns. So I would support these as permitted uses.
Other discussion?
Great point. Sorry, I'm trying to find my place here in the packet.
Are we ready to move forward?
Commissioner Surma here. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my place in the packet. I lost my place. I just would like to make it clear in our proceedings that it's stated here that the units must be directly adjacent to or on the property of the institution's primary house of worship. What the exact language here? It's on page.
Are you talking on the basis of recommendation page?
Yeah, the basis. Yeah. It's in the statute here that has a say that a sacred community must. Sacred community means a residential settlement established on or contiguous to the grounds of a religious institution's primary worship location, primarily for the purposes of providing permanent housing for chronically homeless persons, extremely low-income persons, and designated volunteers that meets the requirements of subdivision 3. This is on page 11 of the packet. I just want to emphasize that section. I think that's really important, and that because I know religious institutions can own many different types of property throughout the city and throughout the region. I think that's an important section to call out here, and I know that's in state law, but I just wanted to emphasize that. I don't know if it needs any particular call out for our motions, but I just wanted to specify that is a key component of this argument, that they have to be directly adjacent and contiguous to the place's house of worship. Just want to call that out for public information and for our purposes here, if that contributes to the conversation at all.
Any other discussion? We would need a motion to proceed then to approve the staff recommendation.
Chair, I would like to make a motion to approve, recommend approval of the ordinance amendment to allow microunits as an accessory use to religious institutions.
Second,
Commissioner Hui, a second.
any further discussion? All in favor of adopting that recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion carries. Liaison reports. Community Services Advisory Commission.
No meeting?
City Council.
He's not here.
Oh, that's right. Housing and Redevelopment.
The HRA is accepting applications for a seat on the HRA and EDA through December 15th. So if anyone's interested, there's information on the city's website on how to apply. At its last meeting, the HRA approved an MOU with the owners of La Vaquita Mexican Market to continue discussions of the development at 1430 66th Street, which is the lot right next to Frenchman's. So there's those conversations continue. And the HRA also approved an MOU with Lindell Gardens, with the HRA agreeing to contribute up to $500,000 for capital costs and a financial match for sewer charges to help facilitate a commercial development on the last remaining parcel that's yet to be developed in that site.
Thank you. I don't have a report from the school board. Transportation Commission.
Chair, there's nothing to report on.
Chamber of Commerce.
Nothing to report on.
Sustainability Commission.
Nothing to report on.
All right, City Planners Report.
Chair and Commissioner, I just wanted to remind you that the first reading for Astor Commons was held on the 14th of November, and there were just a few people from the audience that stood up in support of the request, but they, as first readings go, they did not discuss the item. And the second reading and the rest of the request will be decided by the City Council tomorrow night. Also, we had no land use applications for the month of December, so we will be able to cancel our December Planning Commission meeting. Happy holidays.
Commissioner Rudolph, is this your last meeting with us?
My last meeting will be January 22nd.
Oh, all right. Well, we will save the farewells till then. All right.
Thank you, Commissioner Rudolph, though, in case you're not here or
Yes,
whatever.
we can
I do want
it
to thank
now
you
for sure.
nonetheless.
Oh, it's a pre-thank you, thank you. All right, well, if there's nothing else on the agenda, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Should we second?
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.